We are going to start out with our three wonderful wineries. We have Steve Bell from Campana Ranch. We have Kieran Robinson from Kieran. You're calling your five R5, or are you calling yourself Kieran Robinson still?
So it's both brands, but right now most of the wines are R5 wines, um,
Okay.
in conjunction with the tasting room that we're opening on the East Coast.
Yeah, we got to hear about that. And Fred Peterson from Peterson Winery. So I would love each of you to introduce yourselves and to talk about the kinds of wines that you make, your winemaking goals, and what your philosophies are. And we can start in any order. Steve, why don't you give it a start? We'll go alphabetically.
Okay, my name is Steve Bell, and I have Campana Ranch Winery. Campana being my last name in Spanish. I was a manager of vineyards starting in 1977 with Free Marquet for 12 years, 19 years with Behringer. In the field, I was known as Senor Campana, and I decided it was much more interesting than Bell, so I kept the name. My wife and I started this after I retired in 2009. Campana Ranch Winery, our first vintage being 2012, where we only make about 750 cases maximum per year, but I make 12 different types of wines, all the Bordeaux's, Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Cabernet, Petit Syrah, and Chardonnay, Rosé, and two ports, a red port and a white port. So each one of these is only about, all of my varietals are only about 2 to 3 barrels a piece. So they're very, very small, very handcrafted by myself. One of the things that I pride myself in is that I try not to add, being a viticulturalist for so many years, I know exactly where to get, how to get the best grapes, because it all starts in the vineyard. So by getting the best grapes that I can find, because I only grow Pinot Noir here in the Russian River Valley, I end up trying not to put anything into the vineyard. I ended up going straight from the press into the barrels, where it rests for about 2 months before I rack it off. It's lees, and I try not to do anything else to it, as little as possible, as close as I can get to natural winemaking. In other words, I do not add any additives. A little bit of sulfur, just enough as an antioxidant, but I don't filter my wines. I rack it 3 times in the course of its life. Most of the time for reds, 18 months, a little better than a year for the whites. And, I feel that the grapes present themselves better without filtration, without a lot of manipulation. So that again, being the key, starts in the vineyard. Get the best grapes you can and make your wines as, do all the due diligence to be a good winemaker, and let the grapes do it themselves.
That's awesome. All right, Kieran.
So my name's Kieran Robinson. We have 2 brands. It's Kieran Robinson Wines and R5 Wines. My wine journey was a little more untraditional. I grew up on the East Coast in the Philly area, and went to Ithaca College. So I got my start in wine in the Finger Lakes region, and then actually moved back to Pennsylvania and worked at a small winery here, and then had the opportunity to move out to France for a year. I worked in the Northern Rhone Valley for a year, and then out to California after that. So, and then started my brand in 2009 when I was out. I think we were out there for about 5 or 6 years. Did mostly Syrah for many, many years, and then we're opening up a tasting room on the East Coast, so decided to expand our portfolio. So now we're making Viognier, Syrah, Roussanne, Chardonnay,
Nice.
2 Rhone blends, Mourvedre, Grenache, so a lot more wines. Also, kind of going on Steve's point, we do all of our wines with minimal intervention. Everything we do is with native yeast. Very little sulfur again, and no filtration. So,
Fantastic. Well, I always say that, small wineries can't afford to buy all of the junk that people put
Right.
in. So you can rely on them not to be as additive rich as others, right?
Right. I mean, if you're diligent, it's actually cheaper to make
Right.
low intervention wine than it is to make, kind of the mass produced stuff.
Absolutely. Okay, Fred.
Um, Fred Peterson, obviously connected to Peterson Winery. We, I, when my son Jamie took over winemaking responsibilities in 2006 from assistant winemaker, I promoted myself to wine grower. Um, Peterson Winery, our first vintage was 1987, so 30 years now. But I got my start in the 70s. I just sort of stumbled into growing grapes and making wine. I loved drinking wine. I grew up in San Francisco, didn't want to live in the city, and ended up doing an internship on a friend's vineyard in Mendocino County and fell in love with the idea of doing that for a career. My original university after I got out of the Navy was UC Santa Cruz. Thankfully, I hadn't wasted all my GI Bill for my fun time and went to Davis and got my degree. Graduated in 1978. So, like the others on the panel tonight, we make far too many wines. We do about 20. If a business MBA had done a business plan for our 8,000 case winery, we might make 4 wines, but I didn't have a business plan. I'm not a businessman. And for me, the fascination of wine is the different, what you can do with the same variety from different vineyards. We do, 5 to 6 Zinfandels from different vineyards in Dry Creek. I joke, if you make wine and don't do one Zinfandel, you're stupid. And if it's not good, you should like leave the wine business. Here on Bradford Mountain, where I live, and the estate vineyard, we grow small amounts of Syrah, Mourvedre, Grenache, Petite Syrah. I planted a small block of Vermentino, Verdelho, and Grenache di San Gimignano. Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, tiny bit of Malbec, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and probably something else. I don't know. And then we do a rosé. We try to always have one dessert wine. Our current one is what we call Zin Essence, which is kind of a mistake, that turned out well despite our intentions. Yeah, we make a tiny bit of Malbec. We do. You have to go to our website because I can't remember. I mean,
this is when you say, "I just work here," right? I mean,
I just show up occasionally and wander around the days, and So anyhow, in terms of our wines, again, I think you are simpatico to the type of wineries that you have on your blog and that you like, and we've trademarked zero manipulation, and it's a long shaggy dog story. And if there's time, I'll explain. It really has nothing to do originally with wine, but as I tell people, it's not that we don't. It's not zero manipulation because we don't filter fine or put additives in. It's the philosophy of what our wines should be about, and it's about place. And we don't like the big wineries who use the additives and all that. They actually have a more difficult job, in my estimation, because they have to try to make the same wine every year. We make wine from the same grapes every year, but we don't try to make the same wine every year. And as Kieran said, it's the discipline of it's actually cheaper to make wine naturally, but it's a hell of a lot more work because you can't fall back on the technology to correct what you did or didn't do and when you did or didn't do it. It's winemaking is I had the pleasure or the honor of working with some great winemakers over my years. And when I worked with Dick Graff, I won't go into the whole story, but he got in my face when I was at Mount Eden and said, "Fred, whether you rack the Chardonnay this week or do it next week, isn't a big deal. But he goes, what you do and when you do it or don't do it goes into the bottle. So if you don't have a sense of urgency about winemaking, get the F out of the business. And that was yeah, and that's true. And that's what we do or don't do. It's in the bottle. The proof is in the bottle.
Do you think he was the most motivated person that Santa Cruz ever saw? And Santa Cruz known, I mean, I'm kidding, because it's, the school mascot is the banana slug.
Oh, well, Dick Graff, yeah, he was Shalone and all that. I mean, this was post Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz was
Isn't Mount Eden is in the Santa Cruz Mountains though, right?
It is, but it's on the Santa Clara side. It's over the crest.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right, let's go back to Steve. Steve, your wines are all handcrafted. So you talked about a lot of that. What does that mean exactly when you say that? And what is that? How does that sort of show itself in your winemaking? And is that something that you really take pride in and enjoy? I mean, I think one of the really interesting things about you, Steve, is that you were a grower for so long. You manage these massive vineyards, and then now you have your own vineyard and you make wine. So how does that sort of translate? I know you've already talked about, you spend so much time in the vineyards, and that is such an important thing, but what does handcrafted mean to you?
Well, in the vineyards, just to show that part, I knew every single corner of those vineyards. I knew which grapes and how they translated into wines when they went in. I worked with Ed Sabraja a lot with Behringer. We worked together, and we were able to distinguish how grapes and how they grew and what they've made into the wines. Now with my winery, since I'm so small, I know every single barrel. I mean, I almost know them by name, and so I can tell which one's different. They're, how different types of barrels that they're in. I'm one that doesn't use new barrels, so I buy 2-year-old barrels that have a little bit more age, so I can leave them in longer. And I think handcrafted just means that, I'm sure, Kieran and Fred's are all handcrafted too. Mine is a little bit more intimate because I'm so small. So, like I said, I open up the cellar door and there I am with all my barrels. And it takes me about 45 minutes to take them all out and check them every month and a half. So
that's
anyway.
very cool. Yeah. So, and you, I mean, to talk about how you have been in the industry for a while, what changes have you seen in the industry that you think are really good things, and what do you wish hadn't changed quite as much?
Well, the most obvious to me right now is how it's become so corporate. When I started in '77, I worked with Charles Krug at the time when Peter and Robert Mondavi and Peter Mondavi were at each other's throats, and so that was a real interesting time. But
can you tell a little bit about that story? It's a great story, and anybody who is listening, you should go listen to the podcast that I did with Steve. He has this fantastic story. But can you give us the abbreviated version of what you saw?
Yeah, when I started in 1977, I was hired by Alex Bianca, who was working as a vineyard manager for Charles Krug, and I was hired during interim when the court had appointed Doug Watson, who as a court-appointed custodian of Charles Krug Winery. So he basically kicked both brothers out and said, we're going to settle this, kicked both brothers out. And so when he came into Charles Krug, who was trying to devalue his wine so he didn't have to pay, Robert was trying to get all his part of Charles Krug Winery so he could continue with his Robert Mondavi Winery. So during that part, Doug Watson came and looked at Charles Krug Winery and said, your equipment is so antiquated. You're looking at 1954 trucks, gondolas that were old bomb carriers for World War II and things like that. And he said, this is not what this should be. So he started spending money. And I was hired in that time to come out and help, as a mechanic and also in the vineyard. And I started in August 21st in 1977. And then Peter Peter and Robert were in negotiations to try and settle it. And when I went to Christmas vacation, New Year's Eve, left on the 30th, I think, of December, came back to work on the 2nd of January and got a red tag. I was done. And it was because they had settled. So, you know, Robert Mondavi got Tokalan. You got a lot of vineyards on the west side of the valley from Highway 29, all the famous vineyards. And so that's what he took in his, you know, he got those exceptional vineyards. But boy, the fight between those two was something. It was just,
it's still not good, right? Between the two sides of those families. I mean, obviously Robert Mondavi,
Mark, yeah, I mean, Tim and Mark, they're amicable, but they don't carry the animosity that Peter and Robert did.
Right.
They, you know, obviously you've read the stories and the fights and the, you know,
it was all bad back then, right?
It was, you know, it was a Valley Talk. It was, you know, really big event when all of a sudden things came through. And it's probably the best thing that ever happened to me to get laid off or let go, because then I got on with Chuck Carpy and Freemark Abbey for 12 years. And that was phenomenal, you know, just a great place to watch the wine industry grow. And it did, you know, fun time to be in the industry. But, you know, you asked a question, what I see the difference. I think the difference now is seeing a lot of smaller wineries getting swallowed up by the big ones. And then it becomes more of a business versus passion. And passion is what I got in wine industry for, just because I loved wine. And when I went to school for it, got my degree in viticulture. And I've been making wines during that whole time, because there's always a little bit left in the vineyards that I can go out and pick at and glean. So I've been making wines since 1977 also. But it was just, you know, quite a bit of difference. I think the passion part for the actual love of the wine and the love of the people, and you know, I mean, everybody wants to make money when they're, you know, you got to make money, but to the point where corporations were not involved back then. I know I'm taking up too much time.
No, you're not. No. I mean, I think that's a huge thing. And, you know, there's this new deal with Gallo and Constellation is just really pointing to it. I cannot believe that the FTC allowed it to go through. I think that they kind of don't understand wine that well if they think that that's an okay thing to do. And the downstream consequences of it are just that, you know, we're going to have a lot of homogenized product, and it means that they will monopolize the distribution channels. And that's really the bad part about it, right? Is that, like, you know, there's really no room for distributors who have small portfolios, because there's fewer and fewer places. I mean, you know, one of the things that I think is going to have to happen is the onus is now really on the small wine shops to support small and to not even carry any of that stuff, you know? So, yeah, I don't think there's anything. I think you're absolutely right. All right, we'll move on to Kieran. We'll come back to you, Steve, in a second. Kieran, you're a Rhone dude, okay? I mean, you're all about the Rhone. So, do you think that Rhone has progressed at all? I mean, you see more people liking Rhone styles now. You know, I mean, you and I are both Syrah lovers, right? We've bonded about that. But it's been always kind of the dog. Like, nobody wants, you know, not like the lovable dog either. The dog nobody wants to like. Really the underdog. So do you think that it's improving a lot, or nothing?
Yeah, no, it's improved greatly. Like when I first started making my own wines in 2009, all we were making was Syrah, and people told me, you know, you're insane for just making Syrah because you'll never sell it. And it was like, oh, well, I'm going to make great wine and, you know, it'll sell itself. And then slowly you learn that not everyone is buying Syrah. So, but I found recently that there's certainly an uptick. I think like Rhone blends started the kind of uptick in Rhone wines. And then I think people learned what actually goes into Rhone wines. And, you know, maybe some of those Rhone wines were predominantly Syrah, and then I think, you know, started to kind of grow that way. You know, there's always like the joke that how do you sell Syrah? Don't tell people it's Syrah and they'll love it. So
I didn't know that joke, but you're probably right. I don't know why they have why there's like a thing against it. Is it that they think it's too spicy? That's what somebody one time told me.
I think it was for me, I feel like it was um, like the yellow tailization of it. And it
But
was
do you
just,
think how many people you think know in the mass that Shiraz and Syrah are the same?
I don't know. It seemed to me to affect it, and everybody thought, you were going to get this sweet fruit bomb, and that and that's not what Syrah is. It can be delicious that way, and that's kind of why I like Syrah, because it can be delicious underripe, and it can be delicious ripe and overripe, and that's one of the great things about it. I think it just kind of has an identity crisis, and because you can make it in all those ways and still make a good wine. So maybe it's consistency might be hard for people to, when they pick it up, like what wine are they getting? Are they getting this wine that tastes like, iron, blood, and white pepper, or are they getting like something that tastes like blueberry and oak? So that could have something to do with it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about your bi-coastal life here because you're a Philly guy through and through, and Christy, who did not join us tonight, is your wife, your lovely wife, who would have been my best friend in high school had we gone to high school together. We've already talked about that, but she is, you guys, you decided to go back to Philly.
Mm-hmm.
You know how to make wine on the East Coast, and it's not the same. It's very difficult. And now you're going to try, or are you just going to concentrate on Sonoma? You're opening a tasting room, and I know a lot of people are excited when the tasting room opens to come see you, including me.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to your whole distribution thing. We kind of went the distribution route with our wines and just found that we weren't getting any traction in the market. The only time we were selling wines is when I would go out on calls, and it was just really hard because we weren't that big brand that kind of sold itself. We were definitely a hand sell wine. And when, distributors go out, they always put the wines in the bag that, they can walk in and will sell. And it started to kind of, it wasn't great for business. So we decided we wanted to start to look to ways to kind of be able to self-distribute. And we found a way that we could open up a tasting room in Pennsylvania for our wines that we make in California. And it also lets us self-distribute in Pennsylvania, where we're from. So we make the wine now at a place called Sugarloaf Custom Crush in the kind of the northern part of Sonoma Valley, where Santa Rosa and the Valley kind of meet right there. So we make our wines there, and I'm out probably 6 months out of the year, all during harvest in summer, to check in on the grapes, and then intermittently to check on the barrels, and then we're close to opening up our tasting room here, which is great.
Awesome. Now,
Yeah.
will you make wines from there ever?
I think so.
Nice.
Yeah, that's phase 3.
Right.
No,
but it's in the plans at some point.
I think you can. One of my goals was always to own my own vineyard. And kind of when I got into the industry out in California, it always seemed to be kind of priced out of my potential. And so kind of getting my start in wine here on the East Coast. Whenever I went, when I lived in France and when I, was out in California, I always kind of look for ideas and ways that I could possibly grow grapes back here and what I could bring back from all those places to plant a vineyard here. And I think I have a pretty good idea as to what varieties and what, vineyard spacing and kind of all that stuff that I would want to do. So,
hey,
yeah.
Kieran, we have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
One, where in Pennsylvania?
35 minutes west of Philadelphia, in a town, Downingtown, it's called.
Okay. And then the next one is, what's your case production?
In 18, we were around 1,300 cases.
All right. Sounds
And
good.
Yeah, another one. Go ahead, Laura.
We spent a few days on the Brandywine Trail. You mentioned working at a winery out there before. Which one?
It was Chad's Ford Winery, which was kind of one of the OGs here.
Did
Jeremy
you
very good.
now you worked with Cabernet for a while, right? You were in Napa for a long time working with Cab,
Yep.
but you were always you started really with the Rhone stuff. So how did you reconcile that? I mean, was it really hard to kind of be like, and it was Napa Cab, it wasn't Sonoma County Cab, so it was really like a very different style, and it's so different from the Northern Rhone philosophy. How did you adapt? Was it frustrating?
No, I just always, I love Cab and I love Napa Cab, and it's not what I always wanted to make personally, but I loved, most of the places where I worked were Cab houses. When I moved out to California, I got a cellar job at Cake Bread, and then I moved on to Paul Hobbs Winery, where I ran the lab there for a while, and then to Jericho Canyon, which was in the north, kind of north of in Calistoga, and we're all Cab houses. And yeah, I absolutely love making those wines, but I think with the Rhone varieties, you have a little bit more freedom in terms of styles and whatnot. I think making Cab and Bordeaux varieties is a little more linear, and you need to do it's a little more kind of you need to
Right.
make the yeah
Yeah, you have to do the
decisions
program.
to make great wines for Cab. I think sometimes you can not make the correct decision with Rhones, and it can turn out pretty good.
Brian Callahan from Crux Winery is joining us, and he says, why do you make Chard?
That was a business decision.
You had to have one of the popular ones.
With opening a tasting room, and I listened to a podcast one time, and they were actually interviewing a local guy here at a wine bar called Tria in Philadelphia, and I thought it was important to have something on the list. Philadelphia is not known for having people who are super knowledgeable about wine, and I thought it was important to have a couple of varieties on our list that people didn't feel intimidated about. And if they looked, if we had a sign on our door about what varieties we had, they could see Chardonnay and feel comfortable coming
Is it
in.
oaked?
And then, what's that?
Is there oak on it?
It's all neutral.
Yeah, that seems like
so
it's
native.
Jim Morris wants to know, do you blend any Viognier into your Syrah?
If I can, if the vineyards kind of line up.
Don't you have a problem sometimes with Viognier with getting good results from it sometimes? I feel like you told me that at one point.
I think that's like the hardest variety that we make. I think more than any variety, the picking decision on Viognier is like super important, especially because in Sonoma, you pick it early September, which means you can have these pretty high, long heat spikes. So you want to make really good decisions on picking. And if you get hit one of those heat spikes, the sugars can skyrocket, and flavors and acids just, flavors get flabby and perfumey, and the acid just drops out. So I think that for me is like always the hardest pick decision to make.
The Brits love the word blousy. I feel like I don't really even know what that means, but it sounds like that. I think it means what you just said, and I feel like Viognier turns into that hot mess, is what I would call it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's tough. All right, we're gonna move to Fred. Fred, Bradford Mountain. Why is it such a special place? Why is the site so amazing? Why does it matter that you're growing something on a mountainside? And what's the difference between the fruit that you grow on your own estate versus what you contract?
A lot of questions there, Elizabeth.
Well, that's how I roll, Fred.
The Italian expression about, oh shit, senior moment now. Anyhow, that wines love the hills.
They basically say only shit grows in the valley.
Well, or to characterize, someone was asking at a press deal many years ago about Zinfandel, old vines. And Dave Raffinelli said, well, the reason the vines are there is the wine's good. The wine isn't good because the vines are old. He said you could have a 100-year-old Zinfandel vineyard on the valley floor that made crap wine 100 years ago. And if it's still there, it's probably still making crap wine. Site is important. In California and France, Burgundy, the limiting factor is the climate. Soil matters, drainage. In California, it's a rare year where we can't get the grapes fully right. And, you know, what makes quality in a red wine? It's intensity of flavor, color, small berries, so you have intense color, really good acidity. The mountain, for whatever reason, if it's soil, I don't really know, or the different microclimate, but our wines always have better acidity. We pride ourselves at Peterson. We love wines that have great balance and good acid, and we pride ourselves that the acid in our wine comes from the grape. We don't add it from a bag. And the mountain fruit always has, it's much easier to grow grapes. Mother Nature does more of the management decisions than on the valley floor, where especially on the alluvial soils where the vines are fat, dumb, and happy, you get big crops, but they're big berries. It's just easier to grow quality consistently on the mountain. I want to digress, if you bear with me, and on Steve's Charles Krug story. I've got a little addendum. I worked at Charles Krug, the harvest, in 1975 before I went to Davis. And
wow.
The lawsuit was ongoing, but it hadn't reached the point, as Steve characterizes, where they finally settled. Robert still lived on the property, the big old house at Charles Krug. Robert lived there. And he would, in the evening, I worked the swing shift as a racker and blender. Robert would love to walk through the winery because he was still co-owner of it, and they couldn't keep him out. And he was just such a nice guy. I always asked how the harvest was going. And Peter, you know, I don't want to speak bad of the departed, but if you saw Peter coming, you went the other way because the guy never had anything nice to say. And so it's just funny that, and to Steve's point, I was so glad I didn't get stuck in the fermentation room because it was a death trap. You had to put fans on the fermenters to blow out the CO2, and they were 8-foot fermenters, so it was bad. You know, it was the CO2 hung in there. Peter, the health department, it was dirt floor a few years before I went to work there, and the health department said, "Well, you can't have dirt." So he poured concrete, but it was still dirt underneath these funky ass redwood fermenters. And anyhow, and I could regale you about how funky it was, but anyhow, it just brought back funny but not very pleasant memories of Charles Krug. And to Kieran's point about Syrah, your question about Syrah, I love great Syrah. I love savory Syrahs. We grow Syrah, that little block by my house, and I have a tiny bit of Viognier it's a field blend, we co-ferment. But to me, the yellowtail, there's two things that make Syrah so challenging. The yellowtail, the Aussie, big jammy, in your face style, and the American palate. Good Syrah is so savory, has so many layers of flavor. And not to denigrate my fellow Americans, but they like it simple. They like fruit. So why Pinot Noir is taken off, because it's easy to like, right? And even Cabernet with tannins, and it's still way more straight ahead than a good savory Syrah. So anyhow, back to Bradford Mountain. I was at Mount Eden before I moved up here. I was for Montebello Vineyard for Ridge in 1985 to 1990. I was the vineyard manager for Montebello, helping them start their replant program. I mean, my heart's in the mountain, but to me, and I don't want to speak ill of overpriced Napa cabs that come from the hillside, but terroir exists, I truly believe, but only if you let the grapes speak for themselves. And I don't care if you have too much oak, too much alcohol, and lots of alcohol. Those do not reflect any way, shape, or form terroir. They all taste the same wherever they're from. So keeping, for our Cabernet on the mountain, we we want the expression of the grape. There's a little bit of that green olive. I'm not a big fan of these over the top alcohol over oak friggin' thing. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
I mean, I think yes, you definitely did, and I think that the issue is, are you going to spend this time growing grapes in the vineyard and then cover that up, or are you, I mean, you can make wine, you can make a beverage, or you could make wine, right? So wine is made as an agricultural product, and a beverage is made in a winery, and you could use any
but
grapes.
if you're going for big scores from certain individuals, then and the other part of that, and this is kind of weird, but I think it's true. As Americans pay more for wine, they want the wine to be more impressive. They want it to be bigger. They want it to, where in fact, the most incredibly terroir-driven wines are the more nuanced ones, where the terroir is in the subtlety, in the delicacy. It's not in the obviousness. But so that's my rant. I'll get off that soapbox.
No, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're gonna ask all three of you to close it, and then we'll do our separate session for the patrons. But Fred, what about climate change over the years? I mean, you're also a firefighter. You have seen some of this change over the course of time. I would love to hear what you've seen in your own vineyard, in your contract, in some of the grapes that you contract. You still buy fruit from Mendo. Has that changed at all? Incidentally, everybody, the podcast tomorrow is on Mendocino.
Yeah, the climate is obviously changing. And the more difficult part is it's more erratic. I mean, our more recent fires, I mean, the rains have coming later this year. We're in a major deficit. So hopefully we'll get some of those, of a March miracle. But it makes it a little tougher. But coastal California, I mean, some years are cooler. 2020 was probably the climate people tell us it was the warmest year on record. And it certainly, we had some warm spells here, but we didn't have the ridiculous heat that we've seen before. The irony is, in California, the hotter it gets in the Central Valley, the more likely it is to suck in the cool Pacific air, which is what causes the fog and cools the coast down. So we have an incredible variant. I mean, it can be 105 up in Lake County, just 20 miles to our east, and it can be 70 degrees here. So it's more challenging, but I haven't, knock on wood. I mean, we've been able to deal with it okay. And, but yeah, it has been a difficult last few years because of the lack of rain, the lack of early rains. We've gotten a lot more fall fires, winter fires. So it's been pretty stressful.
Yeah. All right. Just for everybody, for Fred and Kieran, Nick Owens. Nick, I have no idea what you're doing awake. Nick is in the UK. I adore you. I have no idea why you're awake. Maybe you're like me and you never sleep. But Nick says Syrah is the most popular selling wine in the UK, and sales are approximately 2 times what they are in the UK. So he's saying ship your Syrah over to the UK. So you're going to have to get on that. All right, we're going to ask you all one last question, then we're going to hang on. We're going to shut the Facebook Live off, and we'll do the patron hangout. But what do you all want people to know about being a small winery nowadays? And what's the place for small wineries? We've already talked about corporatization, and I think we can all agree that it is not something that we're happy about. But what do you see the role of the small winery being now and in the future? And what do you want people to know? Fred, go ahead. You take it.
A small winery, it's always about making connection, Elizabeth. And there's 2 realities to wine. There's place and there's people who make it. And you can't grow wine in ugly places. So as people start to travel again, they come out here, they connect to a place. I mean, what causes you to buy this wine versus that? There's very little crappy wine out there. So it's the projection of what your expectations. And so I think as the big guys get bigger, and it certainly makes it harder in the marketplace to get your wines through distribution, but in a weird way, it raises the value of small wineries wines because there's less of them, and people aren't looking for the same. I mean, there are some people who want Coca-Cola, who wanted the same damn wine every time, but people who truly appreciate wine are looking for uniqueness, looking for that, and I choke when I say it, authenticity. So I think that for us, we make wines that we like to drink. We find enough people to buy them, we stay in business. That's kind of the bottom line.
All right, Kieran.
Let's see. I think Fred touched on most of it. It's you get to there's a a face behind the wine, and I touched on distribution earlier about how hard it was, and being a small winery, I think it also innovation's a bad word in wine because it's so like people have been making it for hundreds of years, but you do get maybe innovation in terms of looking back at older style wines and bringing them back to the forefront. And it's the younger and smaller wineries that are doing that, and I think that's kind of important to kind of look in the past, and you can be a little bit lighter on your feet. Like this Mourvedre, it popped up. I had the chance to buy it, and so I got a ton of it, and it was a one-off. It turned into a great wine, and being a small producer kind of helps us kind of pivot faster. It's my wife and I who run it, and we make, like Fred said, we make the wines the way we like them and what wines we like, and that comes through, I think.
Steve and Cher. Hi, Cher. Cher is the other part of Campana Ranch. She is lovely, and she's joining us too.
I better have. So I agree with both Fred and Karen. I think, one more step beyond, I think there's something that goes with small winemakers that is missing in a lot of large wineries, is that, there's a real passion. And what got me into this, and I'm lucky enough to have been doing this for 42 years, and I still have passion about my winery, much like Fred, much like Karen. He's a younger person in this, but he shows his passion. And that's what draws people to you as a small winemaker. You get to express what you have, draw them into your passion as we have. That to me, for a small winemaker is imperative. You have to, it's an art. You have to, show them that there's no pretense about it. It's not pretentious. That wine is wine. Enjoy what you enjoy. It doesn't have to be, what everybody else says. How do you like it? And then it's so much fun. To me, it's a gas to talk to people. It's so much fun to, tell them what I'm doing, how I make it, how I do this. That's the fun part for me. And, I think it's probably, watching all these little blurbs that come up in the bottom of the screen, everybody's talking to Fred. and he's got a great following, and Karen has one too. And so, it's just, that is important. That's the part to me makes it an art versus a science. Science is where you just got to make the same every time. It's an art, and it's fun. It's passion.
That is fantastic. We're going to cut Facebook Live off. Producers, please stay by our Facebook friends, and everybody is going to stay on who's a patron.